Brain surgery is famously complicated, right? Something only modern science could pull off. But as you're about to see, it looks like some ancient societies may have something to teach us about how to operate in here.
It's February 2022 in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The Museum of Osteology, also known as the Bones Museum, makes a post about one of its newest artifacts, and the photo of it has the comment section going wild. The image shows an elongated skull with a strange metal implant embedded inside it. The skull found in Peru appears to be human, but the odd stretched out shape of the bulbous cranial bones could suggest otherwise. The implant itself is coarse and bumpy and is clearly not an organic part of the skeleton. It appears to be composed of two parts, an eye-like shape on top and a circle at the bottom. Forensic anthropologist Dr. John Verano, who studies prehistoric skulls like this for a living, was stumped when he first saw this image.
I've never seen anything like this. I looked at it and I said, well, doesn't look genuine to me.
Though this implant is rare, perhaps unique, author Heidi Hollis says there's a long history of elongated skulls in Peru.
For us to be able to find elongated skulls, that's not the rare element here. Finding an elongated skull with a metal plate in it, now that takes the cake.
Peruvian archaeologist Julio Teo discovered hundreds of elongated cone-shaped skulls buried in the Paracas region in the late 1920s. And Hollis notes that their surprising appearance makes some wonder if they could have extraterrestrial origins.
In pop culture, we often do see aliens as being portrayed as having an elongated skull. From the popular Aliens movies to the gray aliens witnessed by people said to be abducted by alien beings.
Recent genetic testing of the Peruvian skulls apparently found they had mitochondrial DNA with mutations unknown to any human or animal on Earth. And the metal in the skull adds another bizarre dimension.
It's highly unusual to see such perfection done on something so ancient. How and who did this?
We often associate metallic objects with electronics, so maybe this skull implant is some sort of microchip, or in this case, macrochip, for aliens to communicate with their home planet.
We know people microchip their pets to help locate them when they go missing. In the case of dogs and cats, a device the size of a grain of rice is implanted just under the skin, over the shoulder blades. Could this cranial implant actually track aliens? Does it reveal other ancient secrets? Or is this just one big hoax taking us all for a wild ride? Let's ask the experts.
We turn first to anthropologist Kathy Strain to disentangle fact from fiction.
There have been a lot of known hoaxes in archaeology, in particular with Peruvian skulls, crystal skulls that were found all over the world that were said to have been made by alien technology. Those were fakes. We know that they were cut by a jeweler's equipment, and so it's always possible that something can be hoaxed.
But Strain says there's reason to believe the skull is authentic.
We can see every element of what a human skull looks like. That is not easy to hoax, because bone is bone. We can also date this using radiocarbon, and so that would tell us for certain that it is 2,000 years old.
So since the skull seems to be real, could it actually belong to an ancient alien who visited Earth from another planet? Archaeologist Dr. Ed Barnhart says that though we associate elongated skulls with aliens, there's historical evidence that they are, in fact, human.
This shows what we call cranial deformation. And that means that probably when this individual was very young, boards were strapped to the skull so that it would elongate and change the shape of the skull. It was very prevalent in South America, where this skull is believed to have come from.
Barnhart says it was generally people of elite status from Andean cultures like the Paracas who underwent this practice. Yet we know some people who claim they've been abducted by aliens who say they had metal devices implanted into their bodies. So maybe these are actually alien implants into human abductees who've undergone skull elongation. Or is it possible these South Americans were able to also carry out other complex skull modifications like this?
We have found other skulls that have what we call trepidation and repairs to them. Trepidation is the practice of drilling or removing bone from a head that has undergone trauma. We know we still use this today. Roy from Siegfried and Roy, after he was attacked by the tiger, had to have this done because his brain swelled.
Strange says a recent amazing discovery in Peru in late 2021 may solve the riddle. These are obsidian surgical tools found in what's believed to be a doctor's grave. Strange says this proves ancient South Americans actually had the know-how to perform this dangerous procedure. Yet even though trepanation is a recognized ancient practice, John Verano still isn't convinced this implant is authentic since he's never seen metal like this from that time.
If this skull with its metal implant is genuine, and if it really reflects surgery and implant, of course it would be a significant historic discovery, but given that it doesn't look like anything I've ever seen in metallurgy in the Andes, that's why I have my doubts.
So while John leans toward this being a hoax, there's plenty of other evidence to suggest this is the 2,000-year-old skull of a human who survived a life-threatening surgery.
Our verdict? This skull is most likely an example of ancient trepanation. But until the skull is radiocarbon dated to confirm its age, concluding with absolute certainty that this artifact is authentic would be getting ahead of ourselves.
Take a hike in the remote mountainous area outside Hemet, California, and you might come across a stone surrounded by barbed wire. Come closer, and you'll find this. A large rounded boulder with a strange carving on its face. It's 24 inches squared and looks like an ancient drawing of a maze. It consists of two rectangular boxes, one inside of the other. In the space between the two is a series of parallel lines forming this geometric pattern. A rancher first discovered this stone in 1914 while surveying his property. It's since been fenced off to protect it. Archaeologists have authenticated the maze as a petroglyph from up to 2,000 years ago based on artifacts found nearby. Yet journalist Eric Grundhauser points out this is one maze there's no way to solve.
There's no entry point that actually goes to an end point, so it seems to be a sort of esoteric design.
Grundhauser says some think the petroglyph also resembles another now notorious symbol, the swastika.
Prior to its popularization as a symbol for the Nazi Party, the swastika as a design has actually been used in a number of cultures throughout the world. It has had many meanings, especially in Chinese Buddhism.
In Buddhism, the symbol represents the Buddha's footprints, and in Hinduism and other Eastern religions, it's a sign of prosperity and good luck. Since no one knows who created this petroglyph, some speculate that a possible connection with ancient China is the key.
There is a theory that the 15th century Chinese admiral Zheng He, who put together a fleet to explore the Pacific Ocean, ended up making it to the shore of California, and that the admiral and some Buddhist monks actually came inland and left these carvings along the way.
However, since the design is so unusual, others have a different idea about how it got there.
Given that the carving does not seem to denote any sort of image or symbol that we are immediately familiar with, some believe that it's possible that aliens created this.
Supporters of this theory point out how the design of the petroglyph is similar to that of the circuitry on a computer chip. They say this connects to how some ancient cities like Teotihuacan, Mexico, appear from above to be laid out like a computer circuit board with two large processor chips. So could these be prototypes of computer technology built by advanced ancient alien civilizations?
What's most puzzling about this ancient maze glyph is that it's found in the middle of the desert, far from the trading hubs on the coast. It also doesn't seem to say anything specific. So figuring out the intention behind the peculiar design is a real challenge. Our experts may have some insider insight.
Anthropologist Kathy Strain analyzes the images to see if they reveal any telltale signs of the carvings being made by ancient alien visitors.
I wouldn't expect this to be created by aliens because it's not precise.
We recreated the symbol, and she's right. You can see how most of the lines are subtly curved rather than being perfectly straight. This rules out lasers or other high-tech tools that you'd expect extraterrestrials to use. So could this design be associated with Chinese Buddhist art, as suggested by the tales of Admiral Chung and his voyages?
This petroglyph is located pretty far away from the ocean, and there are no villages, there's no other thing to tell us that in the 15th century a Chinese ship came to the coast of California and came 100 miles inland to create this petroglyph.
So if Chinese explorers didn't carve this, was it the local native people?
One of the older cultures, long before contact, is the Kumeyaay people. Along the coast where this culture lived are other examples of maze-like petroglyphs. We call it the Rancho Bernardo style. And these are diagnostically similar. We know this culture was trading back and forth, perhaps even 100 miles inland. So that is probably the best possibility.
Based on the other ones that we know that are in about 120-mile radius, I believe that they are boundary markers that denote whoever's territory that was.
Our verdict? The Hemet Maze Stone was likely created by an indigenous group that would have lived in the area many centuries ago, possibly the Kumeyaay. But the petroglyphs' meaning and purpose still remain mysteries.
It's January 2014 in the hottest place in the entire world and the driest desert in North America, Death Valley, California. Jim Norris is part of a scientific research team that's investigating a particular patch of wasteland known as Racetrack Playa, which shows few signs of life, except for this. The photos from Jim's team show side-by-side trails of sand stretching for hundreds of feet, all leading to a field of rocks? That's right, the stones are completely motionless, but the trail behind them suggests they were moving at one time. What's even more mysterious is that these trails often appear overnight.
No one had ever actually observed them moving. It was a mystery that had yet to be solved in the geologic circles, and it seemed to me and some of my friends to be an interesting problem to look at, to see if we could figure out how to solve it.
What's really interesting about these stones is that they appear to have moved themselves. No one, as far as we know, has been down on the floor of the playa moving these stones around.
In fact, these so-called sailing stones have been studied for almost a century, and some believe they might be proof of something called animism.
Animism is this concept that everything, animate, inanimate, rocks, plants, animals, has a soul. Some have wondered if this could actually mean that these rocks are alive. Have they evolved to actually be able to move on their own?
Other popular examples of animism include this Mimosa pudica plant responding to human touch, or this Venus flytrap, which is almost human the way its mouth opens and closes. McCarthy also notes these sailing stones in Death Valley aren't the only rocks said to rock and roll on their own.
There are stones in Romania, called the Living Stones of Romania, which are more officially known as Trovants. And they actually grow, and some people even believe that they walk and move on their own.
Scientists say Trovants grow after heavy rains when the stones actually secrete cement. This is because of a chemical reaction that happens when the minerals in the stones come into contact with large amounts of water. But could our rocks actually be alive and out for an evening stroll? Or is there something more mysterious at play here? Let's turn to our experts to find out.
First, NASA geologist Dr. Bob Anderson analyzes whether the sailing stones could be living rocks like in Romania.
Living rocks means the rock itself has life in it, that it has bacteria or it has plant-like creatures in their sheer act of growing and moving are moving the rocks. But I do not believe that these rocks are living rocks because it is in a desert area. If these rocks are in a very hot area most of the time, the bacteria would have a hard time to live.
But if these stones are not alive, could someone or something just be dragging them across the sand overnight?
For a long time, people thought that they're aliens because you don't see any footprints. So they can't be man-made. Also, some of these rocks that are moving are very large. They're 700-800-pound blocks that people could not move.
So if the rocks aren't living beings and they're too heavy for humans to move, then could their tracks be caused by extreme weather? We turn to meteorologist Juan Hernandez.
We don't see any movement in the summer. It's too hot, it's too dry. The movement that we see with these stones actually occurs mainly in the late winter and into the early spring.
Hernandez thinks that observation provides a key clue. He suspects that under certain conditions, the racetrack playa could turn into a slippery, shallow pond with moving sheets of ice.
You've got 4 conditions that need to be met for this to actually occur. The first of which is the surface has to be wet. So it had to have rained. The second condition, it has to be cold enough to freeze. The third condition, there has to be partial melting. It has to warm up to maybe the upper 30s, lower 40s. That's when the movement starts to happen. And then it has to be windy to push the rocks across that semi-frozen surface.
But can a breeze really move a 700-pound rock? Hernandez explains that the uniqueness of this location may have something to do with it.
Death Valley is known for its extreme weather conditions, so it's likely going to take potentially 30, 40, even 50-mile-an-hour winds to blow across Racetrack Playa.
It's an interesting theory, but is there data to back it up? That's what Jim's team is for. They developed a cool way to measure the sailing stones. Sailing.
We figured out how to design a GPS system that we could embed in a rock that would just sit and wait for the rock to move. And when the rock started to move, it would start recording the change in position.
The GPS data lined up with the weather conditions Hernandez described. And further proof? Morris's team even caught one of the rocks moving over time in this time-lapse footage.
Our verdict, the sailing stones aren't moved by ghosts, aliens, or animist spirits. This is a rare natural phenomenon caused by extreme weather conditions. Death Valley is home to a menagerie of wildlife. Slithering rocks are not among them. But that doesn't mean there's not something hiding under a rock still waiting to be discovered.
It's 1980 by the Paluxy River near Glen Rose, Texas. Amateur paleontologist Glenn Cuban is on a mission to document a site that became famous since it was first discovered in 1908. This is why. Take a closer look. These are 2 trails of fossilized footprints that cross each other in the riverbank. But while one set of prints belongs to a dinosaur, Glenn says some believe the others are human.
They didn't find any distinct human toes, but we did find these oblong tracks in striding sequences that were larger than normal human feet, but were not obviously typical dinosaur tracks, and they roughly resemble human tracks.
Wait a minute, humans and dinosaurs side by side? Author Eric Grundhauser says according to believers of the young Earth theory, the answer is yes.
They believe in a biblical foundation that the Earth was only created between 4,000 and 10,000 years ago. Now, many people who have observed this site have taken this as evidence that humans and dinosaurs actually lived at the same time. And in a very literal sense, they crossed paths.
Young Earthers or creationists also point to depictions in other cultures around the world that supposedly confirm their beliefs, like this prehistoric cave drawing in Kutaisi, Georgia, that supposedly shows men hunting next to a dinosaur. But take a look at the size of these prints. They're huge.
They are much, much larger than any recorded human that we know of. Could they point to a lost species of human, a giant?
The mystery is complicated by this other set of prints found nearby. They seem to have normal human shape and size, don't they? How did those get here?
In 2020, evidence of stone tools found in Mexico led anthropologists to theorize that the first humans may have come to North America 30,000 years ago, almost 20,000 years earlier than previously thought. So our natural history is continuously changing when new facts come to light. But what are the facts when it comes to these alleged human footprints? We let our experts dip their feet in for answers.
Archaeologist Ed Barnhart says these prints aren't just too big to be human, they're size 35. And even if there were giant humans in our ancient history, they didn't make these prints.
Humans have an arch and toes, and we have a heel. When you really look at this footprint in the way that a scientific investigation does, it lacks those basic elements.
Humans have 5 metatarsal foot bones that connect to their toes. On the other hand, the reptile foot has 3 metatarsal foot bones, characteristically splayed out from the base. So these are the footprints of a reptile. And NASA geologist Dr. Bob Anderson thinks he knows what made these mysterious fossilized impressions.
What we have here is an ancient stream channel where multiple dinosaurs have walked through.
But if both sets of tracks are dinosaurs, why does one look so human?
It's just the way the dinosaur itself was walking across the ground.
Anderson says it's likely one of the dinosaurs was walking with its weight on the back of its feet, so the toes didn't have much contact with the mud. That's why it's less clear the feet only had 3 toes. And in some cases, erosion wore away the toe imprints even further, making the track look almost like it was made by a person wearing a shoe. That still leaves these other photos of prints from nearby, where the human toe, arch, and heel markings are clearly delineated. What about them?
There have been people who have an agenda supporting the idea of creationism and carved the tracks to look like human tracks.
Turns out Barnhart's right. Research reveals that most of the fake prints were carved by a man named George Adams in the 1930s, as his family later acknowledged. Adams decided to create better examples of the alleged giant human tracks in order to sell tickets to tourists during the Great Depression.
The verdict, none of these are prehistoric human tracks. Our experts have laid out explanations for all 3 types of phenomena seen in Glenn's photos: dinosaur metatarsal tracks, erosion, and intentional carvings. There's no evidence that humans ever walked with dinosaurs. So keep enjoying the Flintstones, just take them with a grain of salt.